Why you need feedback loops in B2B marketing. Welcome back to a fresh episode of breakingb2b.com. I'm your host, Sam Dunning. And if you want to join thousands of legends enjoying past podcast episodes, daily B2B marketing ideas, tips, case studies, and stories, then head over to breakingb2b.com and hit that newsletter tab. So joining me today is Tara Pawlak. Tara is the Senior Vice President of Marketing over at Revenue Grid. We're going to be diving into why you should be using feedback loops at your B2B tech or service company, what it actually means from a tactical perspective, how you can gain that feedback and put it into play to grow your business, grow your pipeline, grow revenue. So with that, welcome to the show, Tara. How you doing?
Hey, Sam. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries. Looking forward to diving into the topic today. So we never mess around here, Tara. We always get tactical as quickly as we can. So with that, when you say feedback loops in B2B, what does that actually mean for our audience tuning in?
Yeah, so that means being as close to the customer as possible and continuously. So most marketers get involved with understanding the customer, doing research, all that. And it's also like after the fact, right? I'm not suggesting that you go into the buying process with sales. I mean, sometimes you have the privilege of doing that, which is amazing. If you can, you should do it. But I think from a B2B feedback standpoint, last year looks very different than this year. Things are constantly changing. So you need continuous feedback loops and have marketers really be in constant contact with the customer. And there's just different ways you can do that.
Got it. So when we say feedback loops, I mean, for anyone tuning in, what's the reason for doing it? Like, what's the advantage? What's the main kind of benefits that we can gain by doing this process?
Yeah, I would say one of the main benefits is trust. We all read that, people buy from peoples, and humans like naturally want to buy from someone who they trust. And I think that really starts with a brand. And, even doing a lot of the research today, right? Like, I think it's like 70% of B2B buyers have done all of the research before they even talk to sales. So what that means is they're out there on the sites and, communities and in groups and just doing all this research on their brand. And imagine them reading your content and not really resonating or sticking with them because maybe they use different terms or they have different pains or challenges. So you're already kind of putting that impression in their brain. That's why it's like super important to really have them in there nodding their head with every interaction, anything anyone would ever say about your brand when they start to research.
Got it. So when we say talk to your customers, a lot of folks in marketing like to say that, but what does it actually mean? Like, are we talking to customers we've just won? Are we talking to customers that love us and been with us for years and years and years? Are we talking to target prospects? I'd love to know granularly what that actually looks like.
Yeah. I would divide them into like pre-sale and then like current customers, right? Because those experiences are very different. And I think the level of education that you need is from your standpoint as a brand and as a team to tell them certain things and help them and understand them are vastly different, right? So from a pre-customer standpoint, being able to interview customers at different parts of like the buying process. So if it's like an engaged, prospect that has been to a lot of events or interacted with a lot of your content or something like that, you'd be surprised once you just ask them if you could have a couple minutes of their time and really interviewing them. So a lot of marketers, like I mentioned, will launch a project or a survey, which is still great. And it's still part of this feedback loop. But I think actually speaking to somebody and asking them those big questions and understanding really how they're thinking in their head is so valuable. And then also once they become a customer is, crucial because retention rates, that's obviously important. And that's kind of like a selfish thing, right? As a brand and a revenue and, the churn rate and all of that. But customers change, their challenges change, businesses change. And so you never want to say, okay, great, now they're customers. We'll just kind of give them, this content that we think that they would like, right? You just don't know. And I think really depending on your product or service, it actually helps really the internal teams as well as like what you're building. Is this going to resonate? Should we change something? They might have the best feedback in the world, but if you're not talking to them directly, well, you'll never hear it.
Got it. Got it. And when it comes to kind of getting that feedback pre-sale, what does that look like? Is that the sales reps kind of gaining intel as well as doing their usual sales process, be it discovery, presentations, demos, and more? Is it marketing getting involved and kind of asking them some of the questions, or is there a certain way that we should go about that tactically?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think as marketers, we have so many resources now that, you know, we don't need to just like barge into the buying process. So, you know, looking in your CRM and explaining to your sales team ways that you can get notified. And you can do something as simple as having, you know, AEs tag you in an opportunity. And of course, you can't do this when you're in like, you know, the thousands and stuff like that. But you can learn a lot of understanding what they're looking for, what their challenges are, the feedback. You can listen to, you know, recorded calls and gathering all of that intel first. And then understanding, okay, this isn't one of our big like whales. Like if we, you know, win this customer, we can, you know, repeat it and maybe even scale it in this industry or something like that. And really figuring out which ones that the marketers do want to talk to.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So it's more in the pre-sale side of things from a marketing perspective, it's more about leveraging tech to be able to weave yourself into that flow.
And picking and choosing with your sales team when you have those allies within sales and they build that relationship and they have that trust level a little bit further down, if they don't mind having a marketer listen in on the call or be part of the call. I've been able to do that in my career, and it's so valuable, like live versus like a recording that you're just listening to versus being able to pick up, you know, their body language and their cues. And then a lot of the times you're even like can be part of the conversation as well and ask them questions.
Nice. And is this useful only for helping to get deals over the line, or is it also useful from other aspects? Like there are other bits and pieces of intel that we can pick up as marketers from this?
I mean, I think it should be really useful for everything you're doing as far as like messaging and even sometimes positioning, obviously understanding how you can weave the value back to the prospect. Because if you're able to get into that part of the buying process, that everything that they say is like gold because like that's your goal, right? As a marketer is like, you know, top level, like funnel and all that, and really getting them into where they're going to, is hopefully if you're sales led or, you know, product led, however you want to call it, to get them to that point where they're almost over the line. So I think that's actually the most crucial part to understand, like where we could weave this into our other programs and campaigns when it makes sense.
I completely agree. I think a lot of what I hear from marketers on LinkedIn and similar platforms is a lot of folks say talk to your customers, but a lot of the advice is geared towards perhaps customers that have been with you for a long, long time. And I'm sure you've seen the same, is they'll be biased. Like they'll probably know, love, and just respect your company so much because maybe someone partnered with them years ago and then you've overtaken as a marketer who works with them, whatever. So you're almost like so far biased deep rooted in their organization that every answer you give, be it a survey, be it a Zoom session, whatever, is just going to be leaning towards that company. Whereas like you say, if you can get on the cold hard front of it, where sales reps are even early in that process, maybe doing cold outreach, or they've got their initial discovery call, initial demo calls or presentation calls, then you really start to understand what those kind of juicy, expensive problems are that your target market's facing, the impact of them, maybe the common questions that they're raising. And that intel is, like you say, super useful for all kinds of messaging, be it ads on the website and multi-channel, right?
Yeah. And the idea is just to like focus on the right customers too. Like obviously you need to understand like why you win and, you know, how you're actually helping customers at the end of the day. But I mean, that's kind of like the golden ticket to figure out like what actually makes them move the needle and move forward with your company. And it changes over time, to your point. Sometimes there's customers that are so sticky and it's just because they love a customer service manager, which is amazing, right? At the same time, but like their experience is vastly different than a net new prospect. So it's really important to understand both. And I think, you know, with people changing jobs too, with customers, it's also super interesting that you think your customers know you so well and your product and all that. And then when you do the customer research side and interviews, they might say like, oh, we're staying with you for X, Y, and Z. And you're like, oh, that's so different than like what anyone else would say of like the value prop. You just kind of like assume like the greatest and best things that your company's offering is why all customers are staying with you or they're happy, right? And it might be something actually really small. So it's just like interesting as you talk to customers and he just open blanket statements to understand their experience and why they love your company.
Do you ever face any roadblocks, or do you hear of marketers facing roadblocks when it comes to listening into those initial pre-sales calls or getting involved in those conversations early stage?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's no sales rep, I think, on the planet that's like, woo, let me add someone else to my call, especially a marketer. So I think in any team and environment, you really have to work very intentionally as a marketer to know that the sales team understands like why you want to be involved, that you're really trying to just like understand. And then once they get to know you, and I guess if it's something that you've never really done before as a leader and somebody on the team, is, kind of go over the expectations and like your role in the call, like if you're just like listening or if you're able to ask them questions after. And I think really just focusing on the human and really being on the side of the buyer goes like such a long way, that you're not there to sell them anything at all. You're there actually just like super interested in them in their role in their company, and people really can understand that.
Nice. So we talked about pre-sale, but kind of moving on through the deal cycle, what are the other stages that we should look to get feedback loops?
Yeah, I think one of the most important ones is, right after signature,
Okay.
because there's so many conversations and there's so many deals that actually get stopped at that, like, final yard line, right? And there's just so many interesting things that can happen behind the scene at a deal. And, there might be hidden stakeholders or a lot of internal discussions that might be shared directly with, of course, your sales team on like why you won the deal, like any insights, what pushed it over, like was it the price, like all those little things that you're not really privileged to as a marketer. You're just like super excited that the sales team closed a new customer and all that, but getting kind of to the nitty gritty. And again, you kind of have to pick which AEs trust you to have even just a 10-minute conversation with a net new customer can go, a really long way. And you'd be surprised how many of them say yes. Because at that point, they should be the most excited they are, right? Of like pushing that through and becoming a customer, that asking them for 10, 15 minutes. And it could be not a separate call. It could be part of implementation, right? Or, like you can weave it in. So it's really not a lot of time. And just really focus on, 3 or 4 or 5 valuable questions you want to ask.
That's a great idea. That's literally just give me an idea for our onboarding questionnaire to ask that question, like, what was the main reason for you choosing us over our competitors or something like that? That's a great point. I think that's a good idea. Kind of keep it as fluid as possible, I'd imagine. So like you said, while some prospects or some newly onboarded customers might be open to these calls, I suppose if you're saying like you've just signed and then trying to get them on call with a sales rep, then another marketer, and then something else, I suppose trying to keep it as straightforward for the newly won customer as possible is also something to consider. But at the same time, trying to gain those useful insights that you can leverage for the business.
Yeah. And I will say you do have to work really hand in hand with your sales team on this, right? You got to like pick and choose. This is not something to implement across like every customer, if they're good at sales, they can understand which ones would probably be open to this and which ones they can kind of push for the information or an additional question. And then other ones that maybe not, maybe this is like a 10-month deal that has been really hard on both sides and maybe just leave it alone, and then they go on a list for, 6-9 months in after becoming a customer or something like that.
Got it. Anything else that you'd like to ask newly onboarded clients when they've just signed?
Yeah, I think understanding what they think the biggest challenges internally could be. Those can be some interesting, questions, because usually you're working like maybe with a buying committee and then there's like a champion, but it's like understanding who actually uses your product or service, because sometimes they're just like handed off, right, to like a different team who hasn't been part of the buying committee, right? And so I think knowing that upfront, because, you know, as marketers, our jobs are also to help the company, you know, educate, inspire, and have the customers adopt whatever you're kind of selling into them or, you know, offering them. So maybe there's like content or programs or classes or however you got, you know, manage kind of customer success.
Yeah.
And I think customers themselves can give you some really good clues to that.
Got it. So is that coming from a mindset of thinking about expanding the account early, or is that more just thinking like we want to make sure you get best bang for your buck out of our product, out of our solution? Like, are there any roadblocks that you can see in the foreseeable future when it comes to weaving in the rest of the team on this product and then getting the customer to just open up so you can see like what that might be and how you can kind of better involve everyone else on the offer?
Yeah, I think for me, I led a customer marketing team. So it comes from the heart of just helping customers and showing them value and having them be happy at the end of the day. You know, the business leader in me wants to say expansion and upsell, but you have to start with them having a good experience for onboarding and implementation, and then a little while after that, right? Because then after that, you have no shot on expansion upsell if they don't have a good experience, you know, for the first 90, you know, days, 120, 6 months, 9 months. So that's kind of where that comes from, of really understanding them at that exact stage and what you can do to help them. And sometimes when they give you answers, you might not actually be able to, but then you at least still know the answer, right? Because you're supposed to be like a partner to them at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's a great question. I like that. Anything else we should look to gain insight-wise at that early stage?
I mean, you can ask them kind of a million things, but I would actually advise you not to do that. I would say pick with like, you know, like 3 or 4 things that you feel like as a marketer, you can gain a lot of insight and information, and then build something out of it. Like if it's like a program or content or direction or, you know, something like that. So I would actually advise just to like really be focused on, you know, kind of like 3 or 4 things that you want to learn and that you can actually action on your side.
Got it. And the first question, what made you choose us opposed to one of our competitors or several options on the table? How would you leverage that feedback?
Yeah, I mean, that's like amazing competitive intel, right? I'm not a fan of being kind of aggressive towards competitors and messaging and stuff, but there is beauty in being creative about it and understanding really where you play, because you need to, especially in today's world. It's 2024. There's so much competition and so many different, you know, markets and things like that. So also, it's really great intel for every single person that works at your company, right? Because, you know, competitive intel and insights, it's like sometimes sits within like the go-to-market function. So like marketers and sales and CS and kind of everyone under that umbrella is like dying for that information, but like everyone else outside of that still needs that same information as well. So I think it's a really good way to inform the whole company of like where, you know, where we stand and where we stack up from direct feedback, because there's a lot of people internally that will have their own opinions, their own gut feelings, right? But I always constantly say, like, we're not the customer, we're not the prospect. So I can think that we're way better than our 3 competitors, but that's just my opinion and I'm biased, right? So it's like the level setting internally, I think, is really interesting.
Taking a step back, pre-sale, something I should have asked. I imagine there's quite a lot you could gain from understanding why folks don't go with you as well, if that's possible to kind of collect from those prospects.
Yeah, I would say in my experience, that's definitely harder to obtain because usually they're like narrowing down a couple, you know, solutions at that point. And yeah, I think that can be even more valuable than knowing why they go with you is why they don't.
It is hard to obtain. Like running breaking B2B, every time a prospect wouldn't go with us, I ask what I consider a low lift, but thinking about it, maybe it's not. Just something simple like, could you share why you chose to go to another company on this occasion? That helps us learn and improve our offer. Just usually just send a simple one-liner like that. I'd say maybe 1 in 5 folks reply. So maybe a 20% response rate.
Yeah.
So like you say, it's not it is quite difficult. And some people will be like, yeah, I'm happy to jump on a call and explain.
Yeah.
Whereas other times you just won't get that feedback. So like you say, it can be quite a difficult one to gain.
Well, it's
and
easy
also to get the
ignore,
truth.
I think, because they've already like written it off. And I like to think people are inherently good, so they're a little afraid to be like super direct or transparent. But there's different ways, and you also don't want to like continuously ask them. You want to leave on like a good note. So you don't want to like ask someone who hasn't been responding like multiple times, right? You kind of have to let it go. So yeah.
Okay, cool. So we talked about pre-sale, talked about right after signature. Is there another case where we should look to do this, or several other cases?
Yeah, so I love to go to the customers who have been customers for a long time, because I think those are very strong. Whether they're like strong, public advocates, they're still advocates, whether they know it or not, right? And they'll be very honest, I think, at that point, right? If they've been customers for years, interacting with your company, and they have that super high level of trust, right? They've like signed multiple renewals and things like that. So I think they're amazing to kind of pick their brain on any new initiatives, like before something rolls out, maybe it's messaging or positioning or the product roadmap. And it's also like a lot of customers, I found they're, kind of honored by it, that you're like letting them in the behind the scenes, if you will, of like, hey, we really, want to run this by you. I'd love your thoughts on it. We're so happy you've been a customer, and happy. And if there's anything else we can do for you, it's a relationship play, right? And I found that they're actually the most open, and will say like, oh no, we don't use you guys for that. We use you for that. Or it'd be really great if you had that, because they're so like deeply ingrained. And I think one of the most interesting things as a marketer is you've like new, product launches or new information. All marketers think like, oh, we've already told them that, it's in our newsletter, or we did all this. And it's like, people are like heads down doing their work. So if you start to ask them, oh, have you seen, the 2.0 version or whatever you're going to ask them, or this new service or new offering? And a lot of them are like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then you're like, oh, wow. Like we got to take a step back, because we're just like in our own brain, and we're just biased. So yeah.
Big time. Very, very good example. I like that. So ideas on new initiatives, new solutions, get their feedback, get their take, get their 2 cents, whether it be useful or not. Anything else we should look to ask them, perhaps from a different angle?
Yeah, I think understanding more of their role. So, we're all going to be biased and want to know everything about how to help us, right, in the company, and grow, and messaging, positioning, adoption, all of that. But understanding their role and their challenges, because they evolve, like, especially if you're like in the SaaS tech world, right? Like everybody's constantly evolving, doing different things, have different interests, or maybe getting told this is now your responsibility, or things like that. And people inherently want growth and development. So I also think it's a really great time to understand, what could make their job easier, which we all do in the beginning, right? Like when we're trying to like, who do we focus on? Who's our ideal customer profile? But like, what about the customer that's been with you, for 5 years and now has a bigger team? Like, what are all those roles? How are they, involved? What's their everyday responsibilities? Because at the end of the day, you should be helping people achieve what they need for their company. Yeah,
it's a fair point. And I imagine if you're carrying out these on, like, how often do you recommend doing these conversations, be it with kind of long-term clients? I guess right after signature is what it is, but with long-term clients, is it something you recommend like once a quarter, or every half year, or is there like a cadence you recommend?
Yeah, I would say try like at least a couple times a year if you can, right? Not everyone's going to be receptive to that, but again, you can couple it on like maybe a QBR where your CS team's like already talking to them. I think when you're trying to ask for an additional meeting, that can be really hard, especially it's like they don't know me, like that, like it's easy for them to just say no, and you don't want to push them. So I would say, get your list and try to really just focus and definitely have those conversations every quarter. But with each individual, customer, if you have say like top 20 that you want to make sure that you're getting feedback and talking to, just make sure it's at least twice a year, I would say.
Nice. Got it. And I imagine if you've got your CS team asking these kind of questions, like it strengthens relationships with existing clients because they're thinking like, oh, these guys trust me enough to ask me like what I actually think of this new offer or this new feature or this new rollout. And then they might dive into a bit deeper about how they use an existing feature. And then being CS, like myself coming from a sales background, I'd probably think, well, if you're not actually getting that much usage out of this, but we can see you're getting out of usage or using this a lot, have you considered this? So I imagine it's like a win-win from every angle. Like you get active feedback, but at the same time, you strengthen relationship with existing customers and therefore they trust you more and are more likely in time to invest more with you or expand their account or all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, very rarely have I had like a negative experience with it. Usually the customers, you know which ones to ask and they're very receptive because at the end of the day, they're happy, right? That's who CS will talk to bring in like external, like somebody from the marketing team on the call to be involved. And so they usually are like more than happy and honestly like excited to have somebody else on the call to talk to and give their feedback. It's so valuable. It's almost like, oh, they're like impressed that like, oh, your marketing leader wants to talk to me. Like, absolutely. There's like that they also want to offer what they can back when they're a super happy customer.
Yeah. And that second point, talking about customers' roles and challenges, and that as marketers, we kind of think everyone knows what we do and the problems we fix in all our offers just because we pinged it on in LinkedIn or we put it in a newsletter or we talked about it on a podcast once. It's like, we're all guilty of that, getting in our own heads. Like the proof of that is I probably do 1 to 2 posts about the value or how to use SEO or how to make it a revenue channel in your B2B tech or service org every day. And I still get folks messaging me saying, Sam, do you do SEO? And then I'll start FaceTiming. But it's so true. Like we're lost in our own world because we talk about it, we know it, we live and breathe it every day, but we've got to realize our prospects or our customers have got 1,001 things to do on their list every day. So
yeah,
you've got to keep banging the drum, really.
Yeah. And I think the more you can be like creative about that, I think that's like inherently the marketer is like, what do you mean? Like we already did this like 3 or 4 times, but it's like, okay, we're not suggesting do it in the exact same fashion out the door or whatever, but figuring out a creative, unique way that you can like gather their attention and just like their intrigue, honestly.
Cool. So pre-sale right after signature, long-term clients, any other opportunities that we've missed?
I mean, I think a lot of this is super important when it probably goes without saying, but go into like a new market or develop something new as well. I think it's amazing that there's so many companies now that have advisory boards. It's like chock full of like, information and insights. And those are usually people that are very like passionate about what you do. So I think, besides like the prospects and the customers, it's also like the industry experts as well, because a lot of those types of people are also keeping up with trends, seeing how the market is doing. A lot of times customers or prospects only do that when they have like a need, right? When they're in that exact moment that they're looking for someone who offers SEO. They're not going to be the SEO, like 20-year veteran or, something like that they up with that. So I think that's also super interesting to almost treat the industry experts or advisors, however you want to categorize them, as like another whole segment, because they can give you so much valuable information and they usually come to the table with more insights and knowledge, just to give you different ideas and a different perspective.
Have you ever used a customer advisory board? I've seen Saas brands like Chili Piper and I think Apollo and a few others are utilizing them, but I don't actually know that much about what they are or how they work or the benefits.
Yeah. So I'm actually like a newly advisor for a company called 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗁𝗲 and it's marketing attribution. So like I was just explaining kind of the way I look at it, where I'm just like a geek and like nerd out on marketing technology. So I'm like excited to go and like see different tech. And I just like want to know that in general as a marketing leader. So I'm always happy to like brainstorm and iterate, like even though it has nothing to do with, Revenue Grid, it's just me as a marketing leader. And it's a way to kind of have it go both ways, where that's like exciting to me to understand what a, new technology company might be doing or releasing that I think could help marketers at the end of the day. So it's also kind of just like a fun, like I kind of look at it as almost like a community type of thing where you get to be with your peers, but it also give direct, like concrete, feedback or get involved in different things.
Got it. Okay. So they kind of bring in a set number of folks that hit their ICP, and then you play around with the product and give feedback. Is that how it works?
I mean, advisory boards are set up like all different, but that's just like one example of it as well. But you can also, be part of like some of their events. And if you become a customer, obviously you could be like a referral. And there's different ways in which tech companies kind of set it up, how they work. But it's really fun, I think, for advisors because there's many different ways that you can get involved and like what you're interested in.
Got it. Okay. So we've covered a few ways to get feedback and drive feedback loops. Few points just to dive a little bit deeper. Who should we, of these 4 ones we've talked about, so pre-sale, right after signing, long-term clients, and possibly customer advisory boards, who should be taking the feedback? Is it purely kind of coming from sales and marketing, then weaving into the different channels that we talked about? Or should it be going sometimes up to even CEO or founder level, or does it depend? Or there are a few considerations we should consider there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be biased here, but I think everybody in marketing on your marketing team should be involved. And when I say that, I mean like every role, like even like designers or, people that you wouldn't typically think would be like front-facing customers, because I just think it's such valuable insight that you can gain by being exposed directly to customers, whether that's like in interviews or understanding like the survey research or listening to calls and, interacting with customers too, like at events and things like that are so valuable. So biasly, I think the whole marketing team needs to be involved in some level. But then as far as like the insights and what you're actually gathering, for sure, the go-to-market team needs to have all that information. But I also said like earlier, I think every single person that works at the company should at least be communicated to and have access to the customer and, prospects and all the insights that you're gathering directly, because it matters at the end of the day. It's like, that's what everyone's like reaching for, right? Is customer experience and building pipeline and, generating revenue and retention. I would argue that almost every single role at your company should know all that information.
If you had to boil everything we've discussed into utilizing it for 2 main use cases or channels or parts of the marketing mix, what would be those two options that you could use all this intel we've gained to then inform?
Good question. I would say messaging and positioning, hands down. That's like a big umbrella term, I guess, because then you can kind of break it down on the way in which that you use it, right? But there's so many use cases under there, at least for marketers, right? That can inform campaigns or, content, internal enablement and like training, like sales enablement. That's a huge one, right? So that could all stem with like the messaging and positioning. And I'm not saying you would like drastically change like your brand high level positioning, right? But it can help you understand like insights and trends and really the customers at the end of the day. So that would be one bucket. Messaging and positioning. And then I think the other one that I kind of alluded to earlier too is customer marketing. And so my definition of customer marketing is offering value to the customers with no expectation in anything in return for us, which is not exactly what CFOs and, some of the C-suite agree with me on that. But I think once you're in a customer's corner from a human to human standpoint, they get very, very sticky because they know, okay, this company knows me. They know what I need in my role. They know how to help me be successful. And people don't realize that how many purchases and retention are based upon just like one person's opinion. We hear it all the time, right? Like, oh, we lost that customer because they, had a new, leader come in and boom, contract's gone, we're moving. And so like, that's just like one person like holding all the keys, right? And so making those customers like the hero and helping them at the end of the day, I think is like the customer marketing element of it.
I like it. I think that's, yeah, two good ones. I mean, messaging, positioning is huge. And like you say, that just covers so much of the marketing mix from your website to your ads, to your internal marketing, external marketing. There's so much that is within that. But if you like you say, if you can constantly gather that intel from prospects and be fully aware, really, what are those expensive problems they're facing? What are those roadblocks that might be in their way from getting the jobs they're trying to get done? What do they care about learning, seeing, understanding when it comes to your niche, when it comes to your offer? And if you can be kind of hot on the ticket when it comes to that, you can be quite far ahead of most B2B companies that just neglect a lot of this stuff. Like we talk about it like it's common practice, but not that many companies are really doing this properly.
Yeah, and not, I would say, on a consistent basis. It's all like project based, like, oh, like 2.5 years ago, we did this X, Y, project. And then you're like, but if you take a step back, we're all like, everything's changed so much. And it's like, but you're still relying on that, right? Yeah. So that's why everybody nods their head and goes, oh yeah, we should probably do that more. But figuring out what that process looks like and who owns it and how to kind of keep that going. And to your point, like the enablement and all that insight is so important. But some of it is just more like, heads up, so you're in the know. Like, I'm not going to be like, okay, we're now launching this huge campaign, based on like one customer call. Like, that's not like the point of it, right? It's really to like really understand the customer and the customer needs and their own, expectations and where they're like where they are today. It's not necessarily like everything has to be like, weaved around, done a 180 and we're changing everything. That's not the point. It's like a listening type of tour to see what makes sense.
And from what you've said, a lot of this can be done just by making tweaks or additions to existing processes. So like you say, pre-sale, we've got so much tech with AI call recording software, transcripting, CRM data and note-taking. Like a lot of that you can plug into anyway. Right after signature, like you said, there's different ways you can involve that in the onboarding process and flow with your sales, your CS and kind of marketing team. And then long-term clients, well, that's pretty low lift, they know, like, and trust you, and they believe in you already. So a lot of this, I'm guessing it's just a case of making those tweaks and seeing where you can fit that into the process to leverage it on a more consistent basis than, like you say, once every 2 years. Yeah,
I think that would be the goal, right? Is to make it as like easy and seamless and just kind of like connecting all the pieces together to make it more of like a program, to continue and sustain. I think when you get too ambitious with it, it becomes like people are busy, customers are busy, prospects are busy. So you don't want to be adding multiple steps onto like any of this stuff. The only steps you're taking is like for your own team. So
I've got two more and then we'll wrap things up. If I'm a marketer tuning in and I'm thinking this all sounds fantastic, but I'm really apprehensive that leadership are going to push back on me like a ton of bricks, how do you advise they bring kind of these suggestions and these ideas to the leadership team to try and get this process approved?
Yeah, I would say start small. Like we just talked about, that you have a lot of information at your fingertips. And so do a lot of the work without launching this like big program, right? So bring some insight that you can find already with like tech tools, CRM, even talking to sales, understanding the pre and post sale, like what you have within your systems, and then trying to outline what you're going to get out of by actually interacting with the customer yourself. And start small. Say like, I want to, talk to 5, 10 customers or whatever the volume that makes sense for your organization. And be very, very clear about the goals and the way in which you'll use that feedback. And I think that's like a really good way for people to say like, oh, wow, that's like really valuable at the end of the day, because it's data we're sitting on. And then there's also like the thoughts and feelings of the customer and the experience that they tend to give when you're actually speaking to them.
Yeah. I think that's probably a safest bet, isn't it? Start small, prove that it's actually having some kind of impact. Yeah, and go from there. And the last thing that was on my mind is, if we're getting all these insights, is there a way that we should filter them, which probably not so applicable to smaller companies or startups, but larger mid-market enterprise? I can imagine a lot of feedback could stack up once you start leveraging all these insights. Is there any ways that you recommend to filter kind of all the feedback you're getting, so you're actually getting something that's, I guess, a reliable point to look at? For example, pre-sale, like if you were filtering like the main reason that folks, I don't know, agree to go on a discovery call, then agree to go onto a second presentation call, then look to sign, and then likewise right after signature, what was the main reasons for going ahead with us, etc. All these questions that we touched on. I imagine you could soon start getting all this information. Is there any way you look to glean all that in data and get, I guess, the source of truth of what we should actually be taking, the golden nuggets?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say I would follow how you've built your teams internally, because at the end of the day, you want this to be useful information that you're, gathering and insights and all that. And so an example of that is, like, say your sales team is, maybe made up of like SMB, mid, enterprise, if they're like divided out like that, or there's verticals or territories, or, however that's kind of structured, I would really divide the data by that. Because in theory, like what I'm saying is like, oh, everyone should care, right? But like when you're at a very large organization, hopefully like the leaders and the team, like bigger level departments and C-suite, they'll probably care about every single segment and all that. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure internal employees really leverage and understand the data. So breaking it down into their specific roles and how it could help them is amazing at the end of the day. And so it would make a lot of sense if you did this big presentation of like, here's our findings, from, the last quarter, we did X, Y, and Z, explain how it all works. Here's our goals, and break it down. Cause then you could say to like, a sales manager that oversees, say the East Coast, whatever. It's like that. It's like actual information that their team could like tactically take and, ideate ways to like weave it into their process.
I like it. Cool. Tara, very much appreciate you coming on the show, sharing your wisdom and insights, all things customer feedback loops in B2B. So we shall link to Revenue Grid. We shall link out to your LinkedIn profile. Is there anywhere else that we should be sending the audience, or anything else you'd like to send our folks to?
No, those two are perfect. I did launch a newsletter this year. So you can go subscribe just on my LinkedIn profile. So yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It was a blast.
Yeah, no worries. We'll link out to that for sure. So with that, thanks very much for coming on the show. Thanks to the audience for tuning in. And like I said, if you want to catch our weekday newsletter to check out past episodes, daily B2B insights, head over to breakingb2b.com. And with that, we'll catch you on the next one for more no BS B2B marketing tips and insights to grow your revenue and pipeline. Catch you on the next one.